Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our talk about the water, an educational session featuring Jim Sparrow, the water specialist, and John Waite, a North Carolina Realtors Legal Counsel. I'm Jessica Bryan, I'm your president, and I want to thank you for coming today to hear about this very important issue. Today's event is a joint programming event between our Education Committee as well as the Government Affairs Committee. And I would like to personally thank Frank Nowinski, who is our Government Affairs Committee Chair, for all of his hard work in pulling this program together for our members. I would also like to thank Greg Myers, who is one of our legislative representatives in Raleigh, for also joining us today. So I don't know if you can see Greg, but Greg, if you can wave your hand, and Frank, if you can wave your hand, that would be great. Anyway, today for this meeting, we have set this event up as a webinar. So you can raise your hand and the staff will unmute you so that you can ask your question to our panel of experts. You may also type your question into the question and answer section below, and we'll monitor those and get as many of those questions answered as we can. Thank you so much for joining us, and now on to our main event. So I'd like to introduce our experts. First of all, we have invited Jim Sparrow to join us today. And many of you already know who Jim is. You certainly probably know the name if you've lived here for any length of time. Jim's family has been in residential well and water treatment industry since 1974, operating the Water Specialist Incorporated. He started out working as a helper on job sites, and he eventually, over the years, worked up to operations manager, and now he's president of the company, which he took over from his father in 2012. Now, Jim currently holds licenses in the state of North Carolina for well contractor, licensed plumber, licensed electrical contractor, septic inspector, and subsurface operator. The Water Specialist Incorporated has been serving the Triangle, as I said before, and since 1974, and currently they have 25 team members and provide the services of well, water treatment, and point of sale inspections and septic contracting. Now, the other expert is John Waite, and John is an attorney. He joined Martin and Guilford after founding his own firm and clerking for several judges at the North Carolina Court of Appeals. He focuses his practice on real estate litigation at both the trial and appellate levels and has extensive experience drafting contracts and forms for real estate transactions. John is part of our team that handles disciplinary cases before the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. And he has also had broad experience litigating cases in all of North Carolina's courts, federal courts, and the North Carolina Industrial Commission. In John's free time, he enjoys playing soccer, golfing, running, cycling, reading novels, and spending time with his family. He's also the mayor of Clemens, North Carolina. Having grown up on a farm, John brings a small town client-focused approach to cases, and he is dedicated to making sure that his clients get results. So please welcome Jim Sparrow and John Waite. Thank you so much, and let's have Jim get started first.
All right. Thank you very much, Jessica. And I'd just like to say thank you to the association for giving me an opportunity to speak to you guys today. Definitely know a lot of you from working out in the field with you and probably have talked to many of you on the phone, and we've never have met in person. So, but definitely have a lot of history going back with many agents here on this presentation. Today, I want to just talk a little bit, very briefly, about PFOS in drinking water. I guess you probably had to be living under a rock if you haven't heard about it in the county of Chatham in the last couple of years. At some point, approximately 2 or 3 years ago, it kind of showed up in the drinking water. It through some testing, I guess it was some routine testing, and has been routinely coming up over the EPA limits And so there's been many articles in the paper about many different aspects of this. And I'm not here today to talk to you about all those, but specifically, I just wanted to give you about 10 or 15 minutes worth of information to help you to maybe be able to better answer some clients' questions that may come up, and just to help you more in the field, so that you have a little bit more to operate from when you are getting questions from your clients. So we're going to talk about the wonderful subject of PFOS in drinking water today a little bit. So just our goals for today is really just to determine, kind of give you a really brief aspect about what is PFOS, who is affected in our area, and what are some of the treatment options and price ranges that kind of go along with that. I'm not going to dive into too much of the technicalities. You can kind of get into a lot of chemical analysis of everything, but just real brief, what are PFOSs? And I still probably can't really pronounce this word, but per and polyfluoroalkyl are all groups of man-made chemicals used in a variety of industries. And they've been used since 1940s. It's very common to be used in many different parts of the manufacturing process for many different products. PFOA and PFOS are probably two members in the two most studied and extensively produced members of the PFOS family. I think the PFOS family has, I want to say at least 1,000 different components to it. So, but the two that we really keep showing up with the testing is the PFOA or the PFOS, so PFOS for short. So if I'm referencing, or PFOS, if I'm referencing any of that, I'm kind of just generally speaking about all that. Thankfully, they're no longer manufactured in the United States. And I think that has been since 2016, if I'm not mistaken. But they are still produced some places internationally. And so they can still end up in the country through imported goods. Although most of the problems that are presenting themselves today have come from the production of these items, not from items being brought into the country in a product already produced form. So commonly used in the production of some of these items, I got three things here: food wrappers and nonstick cookware and firefighting foam are probably the three most common areas where this has shown up. The Teflon coating on your nonstick cookware and the coatings they put on food wrappers to help keep things from sticking to them. It's kind of the Teflon is whatever chemicals they're using is kind of where these things have originated from in the production of things. So those are just a few of the items that you'll see that it gets produced with. So next question is really who is affected in our area. Specifically for the context of what we're talking about today, the town of Pittsboro water system specifically, supplied by the Haw River, is the one that has regularly tested over the EPA limits for these type of contaminants. To my knowledge, it has not shown up in Chatham County water, which tends to be pretty much supplied mostly through Jordan Lake water and some other municipalities in the area. I think they get their water from a mix of places, as I understand it. So I'm not really aware of any other water systems in our area that have specific problems with these items, with the PFOS showing up. So it kind of is directly related to just the town of Pittsburgh's water system. Real quick, just what are some common treatment options and price ranges? You might have seen a lot of this show up in talk in some of the news articles, but specifically, you really just are talking about carbon filtration or granular activated carbon, GAC for short. Things like this can be done on a single faucet in a house, for $250 to $500 if that's all you wanted to treat. To put a system in that's going to treat the whole house with that carbon system, you're probably going to be in somewhere in the range of $1,800 to $2,800 to treat the entire house. Both are very viable and very doable in most residences in this area. So that's a very good option. And I'll kind of get into a few pros and cons of these in a minute. But the second option really that you probably heard a lot about is reverse osmosis. Reverse osmosis, typically to treat a single faucet, is going to be somewhere between $400 to $1,300. I know probably a lot of homeowners might have purchased their own RO system online or something, installed it themselves. That's probably closer to the $400 range. For those who are handy enough to do that, to have a company come in and put one in and put a good one in and do the installation and everything, you're probably going to be somewhere, in the $1,200, $1,300 range. Keeping in mind that usually RO is used to treat a single faucet and or the refrigerator ice maker / water dispenser on the refrigerator. So what we'll get into here just real quickly, it just be some of the pros and cons of each one. The GAC, it can be installed to treat all the water in the house or just one faucet, like we talked about a little bit before. It's capable of removing other contaminants. GAC works really well for just removing chlorine and chloramines that most of your city water systems are going to be putting in also, which is, a lot of people do not want to have that as well in their water. It does not waste a lot of water. And so it does need to go through a cleaning cycle, but it's not where it wastes thousands of gallons of water just to do its job. And, you can filter a large quantity of water. So, you really have a large quantity of water available to you at any one time to be able to supply the whole house. So it actually is a very good option for that. The cons, the media inside or if it's in a filter form, it needs to be replaced every 3 to 18 months, depending on the type of system. For the bigger systems, for the whole house, you're looking at 12 to 18 months. For the smaller, just a little small cartridge, you're probably looking at 3 to 6 months. So depending on the type of system, you may be able to do this yourself, or you may need to have a professional do it for you. If it's just changing a cartridge, a lot of homeowners can do that themselves. If it's changing out the big carbon bed, usually most people choose not to do that themselves and would need somebody to take care of that for them. And again, it's kind of a moderate to high price in the price range, but that's certainly dependent on the application. So talking about RO a little bit more, just the pros of it. Typically, it would be installed on its own faucet. And so you would install a separate little faucet for the kitchen sink area. And in addition to your kitchen sink faucet, and most of the time, or a lot of the time, customers will have it run to their refrigerator so that the water coming out from the ice maker and the water dispenser on the door would provide that same water. The one thing about an RO, this is probably the biggest difference between it and carbon filtration, is that when you run an RO, you're actually producing purified water. It makes it into the category of purified water versus with GAC, we're talking about just, it would be filtered or treated would be a better word probably. So you're actually purifying the water with an RO. It does have a lower price point. For the most part, most ROs just have some filters that need to be changed. And so a lot of homeowners can do that themselves. And depending on how much water you're processing and how much water the homeowner consumes, usually you should be able to get at least a year out of the cartridges. Very often we see 2 to 3 years as a regular thing. So, it's a good option there that it doesn't need a lot of servicing normally. Cons on that is you generally would not treat the whole house with reverse osmosis. I know that I see on the next door neighbor, a lot of people asking about that in Chatham area. It's not really a practical alternative for a lot of different reasons that I won't get into, but it would be extremely costly, number one. And then getting into the next point here is another reason. Typically with an RO, you're going to produce 2 to 3 gallons of wastewater for every 1 gallon of clean water you produce. So if you get 1 gallon of clean water for you to use, you're probably sending to drain 2 to 3 gallons of wastewater. So if you were using that for your entire house, for the flushing of your toilets and that type of thing, you can see where that would get very inefficient quickly. So the other thing that's a con on ROs is just the amount of water available at any one time can be limited. Most of your smaller systems would have 2 to 5 gallons of water available to you at any one time while it has to produce some more water. Usually it's just for drinking water purposes. When you're kind of going into the RO, you would fill up a glass, fill up a tea pitcher, make some soup or something, fill up your coffee maker. But you're probably not running 10 or 15 gallons of water at any one time that way. So that's kind of all the cons on RO as we see. The only other resource I really could point you to that I know would give you a lot of information on PFOS if you need it or if your customers need it would just be go to the EPA's website. It's www.epa.gov/PFAS, PFAS. And so, they have a lot of good information in there in terms of just overall what it is and dives in more into the chemical makeups and that type of thing. So that's all I have for you today. I'll be glad to answer any questions coming up if you have any. And,
yes, Jim, thank you. We do have a few questions. First of all, there were a couple of questions about the cost. And while you were talking, I hopped on to Amazon.com, our trusty shopping source, and I found some RO systems that were as low as $125.70.
Yeah.
Can you speak to the differences, because the pricing seems to be all over the board?
Yes, generally an RO is rated for a certain number of gallons per day to produce. So what you'll probably see is a 25 gallon a day unit or a 75 gallon a day unit. So generally speaking, the higher the production per day, the little bit more cost it will run. But I think you're correct in that you probably can find some for close to $200 on Amazon. I couldn't speak to the quality of them. I mean, the one thing about, a lot of people get into brand names and any brand name you have, lots of them produce their own RO. RO, the process is RO, the process. No one company has a proprietary thing on RO. The process is the process. And so if you can buy it under any different name, short of it just being made with quality components, the fittings and that type of thing, most time you should be achieving the same goal either way. So.
Great. Thank you for that answer. The other question that came up, I think you answered about the system, the RO system using a lot more water. Yeah. But the question was, why such water waste with the RO system? Is that something that you can answer for us?
Yeah. I mean, it's just in the design in the process of just reverse osmosis, backing up to just the process, the way it I don't want to get into the technicalities too much, but it basically forces water through a very small membrane. And the water that can get through this membrane, it keeps and says, okay, this is going to be your product. The water that can't make it through the membrane because it has contaminants attached to it, to the water molecule, it has to send off to drain. So real short answer, that's kind of, and most of them are probably only producing 1 gallon, it's a 2-to-1 ratio would be a typical way to do it. Now, you could change that ratio on the short term, but essentially what that would mean is the RO membrane itself would tend to foul up and it wouldn't last you a year, 2 years, 3 years. Now, most homeowners couldn't, but I'm talking about from the design aspect of the manufacturer, they can make it where it wouldn't waste that much water, but the membranes would not last near as long because those things it's sending off to drain would clog up the membrane in a short answer. So
okay, the old axiom, penny wise, pound foolish.
And that's why really an RO is a really nice thing for your drinking water. I think if most people kind of sat down and said, how much water do we literally consume every day in our household? I'm guessing it's probably 5 gallons or less as a whole. I don't know many households that are drinking that much more than 5 gallons a day. if that. So when you look at it in that context, that you're not talking about hundreds and hundreds of gallons a day. So.
Okay, we also have a couple of other questions. Does the typical refrigerator filter remove PFAs from the water dispenser and ice maker?
It is not designed to. A lot of those are carbon-based units, carbon block units, and they have some of those same properties that your activated carbon that I talked about a little bit before would have. The one thing you're going to run into is that they're very limited in their capacity, and and so they're not really designed for that. But most of them are based in some type of carbon type unit, and so I would say to some extent yes, although I don't know that you will find their literature to tell you they would. Maybe that's about the best answer I could probably tell you. And I know a lot of people add small carbon type units to their shower heads that just will help filter out the water coming out of their shower head. And that's kind of the same thing as what many of your refrigerator things would be. So, and I know that the refrigerator filters, they tend to be very small and they tend to be very expensive. So most of those are $50 to $70 maybe, because I think the refrigerator guys use it to make a lot of money, and they're very, very small, like a can of soda size most time, so.
Okay, well, Jim, thank you so much for that overview. And we're going to switch over now to John for a little bit of legal perspective. And John, go ahead and take it away.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. I think my comments will be relatively short, simply because you can tell by Jim's presentation that this is obviously a pretty serious issue. It's going to be a pretty serious issue for most, if not every, property owner. I think it would be helpful just to briefly summarize and go through the license law with respect to material facts. The Real Estate Commission defines material facts as any fact that could affect a reasonable person's decision to buy, sell, or lease a property. Now, in my view, and this is just my personal opinion, that is a really mushy, gray, not very helpful definition. I mean, because literally anything, you could have a buyer who's really concerned about whether all the burners on the stove work. Sorry, that's not material. So the definition lacks. But when you dig into it a little bit further, some of the examples, there's 4 different categories the commission generally puts material facts in, and 3 of those are applicable here. The first one is facts about the property itself, which is a significant or a significant defect or abnormality in the property. Examples of that would be like a structural defect, a malfunctioning system, leaking roof, drainage, or flooding. Those are the examples that they give, okay? Facts that, the second category is facts that relate directly to the property. And these are things that are external to the property, but affect the property's desirability. So like a pending zoning change, restrictive covenants, plans to widen a street, or big developments, especially if it's a residential property and there's a big development plan to go next to it. Third category is facts directly affecting. The fourth category is the facts that affecting a principal's ability to complete a transaction, which doesn't apply here to this particular topic. But the third one that applies here is facts that are known to be of special importance to a party. So long as they're, I think, significant and not tiny, like the example I gave about the stove burners. For example, if a house has a restrictive covenant saying that it cannot be under any circumstances a rental, but that the restrictive covenants have a restriction on leasing, then that would be a material fact that you would likely want to disclose. So you can tell from what Jim is saying and from kind of the general consensus on this, if you've got a property where this is a potential issue, then there's a couple things you need to understand. Number one is the commission expects that if there's a red flag about a property, not even that you have actual knowledge that something like this is an issue, but if you've got a red flag that a property may have a PFAS issue, then you have a duty to investigate it. That is what they expect. So just be aware, this is something where, it should be a regular part of your intake when you're going through the residential property disclosure statement, if you're taking a listing, or if you've got a buyer and there's even a chance that the property may be affected by this issue, then you're going to want to talk to your buyer about it. My firm actually helped the Longleaf Pine Association come up with a disclosure sheet last year in February. And so that might be something where if you are on either side, then you might want to potentially look at having something like that. If your association doesn't have one already, then looking at getting one created. That's something my firm could potentially help you with if you wanted to. Not in our capacity as counsel to NC Realtors. Our firm is general counsel to the state association. So we do a lot of things for them. For instance, the legal hotline, which is another thing you need to know about. If you have any questions in this arena, specific questions, and need a little bit more guidance than what you may be getting today, if you're a realtor, you can definitely call the legal hotline, and we'll get you squared away. And we'll give you that number, or I could say it now too if you want to write it down. It's just the main number in Greensboro, so you don't have to memorize it. 336. Now it's been a while since I gave it out. 294. 1415. For a while, the main office was closed, and so we were actually having to mostly do all of it by email, and that's legal hotline at ncrealtors.org. And those two numbers are also on the website. So if you forgot it or weren't able to write it down, they're easy things to look up there. So in my mind, because there's three categories that this potentially falls into for material fact, there's not a real question in my mind that if a property has a red flag that this could be an issue, you need to dig into it, or if it's a known fact that the property has an issue in this category, then you're going to want to disclose it. And that includes the fact that if a property has a system that's already installed. So in my mind, this is not something where you're only going to look at a disclosure if it's an issue that hasn't been addressed yet by the property owner. I think you're going to disclose any systems that are in there too, because the buyer's going to want to look and make sure that system is functioning properly, and perhaps make sure that the system is creating enough water for the property. If you just got a retired couple living in a place and they're selling it, they don't need nearly as much water as a family of four with some kids, because if they're like my kids, they just love to turn water on and just leave it on because apparently water doesn't cost any money. Apparently that's what my kids think. I don't know about you guys, but I've got four of them. I've got water just going everywhere. It doesn't do it. In any event, so I think you got to look at that. And one thing that I'll mention, and maybe Jim has some updated information on this, and I would defer to his judge or his information on it because he probably is the most current. But I know last year when we created the disclosure for Longleaf Pine, Kenmore's, I think that's how you pronounce it. One of the companies, at least the main company that was having the issue with this contamination, they've signed a settlement agreement where they'll pay for testing and also pay for systems. So, there are these costs, and I'm not sure that they would, maybe they'd be willing to pay for, say, a Honda, but maybe not be willing to pay for a Mercedes when it comes to these systems. But it's definitely something to look at and let your clients know about, that those things are out there. Jim, do you know anything about that?
I do not. I mean, I heard the same thing. I haven't had any firsthand knowledge of it. So I'm not aware of it. And I think you bring up a really good point that I really didn't think about until you just mentioned it for the agents. It was just for systems that are already existing. Because I just see the chatter on Next Door Neighbor and a lot of places for a lot of the local neighborhoods. And, a lot of people are putting their own stuff in that they may buy on Amazon. A lot of people may be hiring it to have it done from another company. And we kind of already established a little bit what I talked about earlier, was just that, you know, some people are just saying, I just want it on my drinking water faucet. And some people are saying, I don't want it in my house at all. And those are two pretty wide, that's a wide chasm, you know. And so when you're going in to sell a house or list a house or look to buy a house, I think understanding exactly what all is there and what, you know, and when was it serviced and who, you know, kind of, and again, your buyers may be wanting to deal with the whole house, and the sellers may have thought it was perfectly fine just to have it on a kitchen sink faucet, you know. So you can run into issues there, I think, but any existing system, I think, is really important to just kind of get as much information as you can on it. And we do inspections on houses a lot where even the people selling the house don't even really realize what they have. So not necessarily related to PFOS, but to other things. So sometimes it's kind of this out of sight, out of mind type thing, you know. So
we're getting some questions, and I do know that Roger Bernholtz has asked or commented. He said, do you think the fact that PFAS is not yet regulated, but only the subject of a health advisory, affects whether it is a material fact?
No, not in my mind. No, I think that it's just because we don't know anything about it. I think that there's enough out there to know that it's most certainly would fit the category, I think, for most buyers, that is going to be an important issue to the party in the transaction. So even if you could exclude the other two categories of material facts that I mentioned, facts, you know, that relate to the property and facts external to it, you know, those two even if you do get rid of those two, I just don't think that you can escape the third one, where it's going to be an important fact to a buyer, mostly just because even if it turns out that this is completely harmless, it could definitely affect property value, and that I just don't see how you can escape it. And furthermore, just because, you know, if you're getting into arguments or trying to justify, you know, why something might not be a material fact when otherwise would be, that to me is, it just doesn't make sense to risk not disclosing. It doesn't make any sense at all. And quite frankly, it doesn't make any sense on the seller side either, because this started before COVID, but I will say it got worse during COVID. And it's these sorts of lawsuits against sellers for things that were not disclosed. And there's currently a case pending in the North Carolina Supreme Court that I hope will give a little bit of clarification on it. But in the Court of Appeals, it was a really long opinion, and really went into the seller duty, into the listing agent duty, buyer agent, all agent duties. Like, it really went through the gambit. And the case was Cummings v. Carroll. It's in the Supreme Court now, so, you know, and there was a dissent in the case, so that's why it's up there, and it'll be decided by the Supreme Court. But in any event, in my view, just based on the prevalence of those lawsuits, and the increasing prevalence of them, because there's deep pockets. You've got potentially two agents, both with insurance companies. It's just a place where plaintiffs' lawyers have figured out it's a ripe area, and they love going for those things. It's no different than personal injury. Mm-hmm. So that's a long-winded answer, but, you know, hopefully, and I only gave a long-winded answer because it's Roger, and I know he's combative and, you know, sort of a know-it-all. So hopefully,
Roger, you can speak up if you want.
He can certainly unmute him, let him defend himself if he needs.
I don't know if we want to unmute him right now. Oh, there he is. He's popping in.
Well, yeah, I will say that I agree with John 150%. And as you know, our company has had a disclosure for some time that we are requiring. But I was told that a general manager at another company contacted one of the lawyers or consumer protection folks at the Real Estate Commission, and was told that the lack of regulation might mean that it was not material. I think that's absolutely wrong. I agree with John, and I think that we ought to be giving disclosures.
Yeah, and on that same point, if you go to that EPA link I put in there, there's a tremendous amount of info there, and the EPA is all over it. So just from that alone, I don't know how you could ever make a case that it can be ignored. You know, there's a number of pages on this issue. So
Even though the EPA has not set an actual number,
yeah, I mean, but again, but at the same time, they certainly have raised the issue that it's high and it's at least the chemical makeup of it is not is harmful to humans in their opinion and in the way they've spelled it out. So
okay.
Well, my
Yeah.
understanding, and this is from the North Carolina, hold on. This is North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality. Their webpage says that they've set a level of 140 parts per trillion, and the EPA has set 70 parts per trillion. That's what they have on their webpage. Now, to me, okay, they've set those levels, but at the same time, they haven't established, at least to my knowledge, what exactly the health risks are. So, you know, they have these levels, but what is, you know, we don't know if you're going to grow another finger or whether nothing will happen, you know. So it's just one of those things where it's kind of up in the air, at least so far as I know. And I'm sure it's one of those things where maybe eventually, you know, they'll make a tie to cancer and some other health issues along those lines. So I don't know if they can't, I don't know if they can make that link or not, but I'm sure that's what some plaintiffs' lawyers are looking at. I can't imagine that they're not.
So I'm seeing a lot of comments actually in the chat that, you know, several companies do have disclosures they're using. They're naming many of the neighborhoods. The question had come up about, is this in Pittsboro proper? Is it all over? We do know there are higher levels that have been tested for in Pittsboro, but in going out to different websites, we're seeing a lot of contradictions. We're also seeing that the whole triangle has this presence. And so I'm combining a few questions here, and I'm going to ask that you sort of, you know, address all of them at one time. But so the other question is it something that well water could have as well?
I guess I could take that at this point. We have not seen it. I know one of the chats said it is making it into the well water. I think definitely down towards Wilmington, there's been a number of well issues that have came up with the problem that was specific to Wilmington. The geology is a lot different down there, so much more susceptible to you know, if you're in a much sandier type environment. To my knowledge, around here, it has not showed up at all. And also our geological makeup of the ground is much different than down east. And so I'm not sure if we will or won't. But the other thing is, just to my knowledge, none of the labs locally that we work with are really testing for it. So it's kind of an out of state type thing, a specialized lab thing where if you want it done, it has to go somewhere else other than the traditional labs we're using. But to my knowledge, I don't know of any of the wells in the area that are affected here, you know, in Chatham proper. So, or the triangle for that matter. So.
I have a question from an appraiser. He said, and I don't know if one of you wants to address this right now, but can you discuss the issues with Agua on Briar Chapel? Many homeowners are complaining about the odor from the waste treatment plant. Does this need to be disclosed? And I know we're talking about the water issue right now, but we do know that there are a lot of pressing issues, and disclosure is something that seems to be something. Maybe John, you'd like to address that a little bit.
As far as just the smell in a community and whether that's material, that is a much more difficult thing to classify black and white as material or not. That would be one I'd have to take on a case-by-case basis and just say maybe. I'm not familiar with this neighborhood, And so I don't know whether this is something that I frequently, what I'll tell agents on the hotline is this. Is this something where if someone was not to get this information, they bought the property, is it going to show up right afterward? Pretty likely. Or if it's, say it's not smell, say it's something else, whatever it may be. But is it something pretty likely that a neighbor knows about, is going to come tell them about it as soon as, you know, they move in, you know? And if the answer is yes, then you better think long and hard before you decide not to disclose, because you are just asking for a problem. You just are. Whether it's, forget the license law for a moment, because I know agents get concerned about the license law, but truly, if it's something where you've done your homework and you decide not to disclose or something like that, and let's say you're wrong, you know, let's say you decide not to disclose, you just get it wrong, you know, and the commission disagrees and says it's material. If you've done your homework and you can show that you've done your homework, well, the commission is not going to like take your license away forever. That's just really unlikely. Maybe you'll get your, maybe you'll get a reprimand and get your name in the bulletin, and you know, life moves on. And that's a far more likely thing. Another likely outcome, quite frankly, depending on the nature of the situation, is that the commission will either dismiss it with no discipline or dismiss it and say, hey, you goofed up, don't goof up again. We see those in these kinds of situations all the time. The commission is not out to get you. To me, the far bigger concern is, you know, making that mistake and then having a substantial claim on your E&O insurance. That is not something you really want to mess with. And to me, a little bit more important consideration, that is, you know, it could affect your E&O rates going forward. It can affect your client, because your client could end up being in the boat, and then your client could have a claim against you too, especially if you advised them wrong. So to me, on something like, say, a smell, like the question, if it is something you know about and it's something that's really, you know, this is going to come up, and what is the real cost of disclosure? You know, is the cost of disclosure that much that you would want to, let's say you maybe in your estimation you think, well, maybe the buyer terminate, we'll find another buyer or whatever. I will say this, and that's, you know, a long explanation, but the reason I can't you know, give a firm one way or another is, what if you're buying a house out in farm country? Sorry, smells are going to be an issue from time to time. Is that material? I really don't think so. I mean, that's just my opinion. If you're going to buy something in the country and you can see that there's, like, you know, fallow land sitting there that eventually something's going to be planted in, you can guarantee that eventually the liquid manure is going to show up at some point. So you better just buckle up when it does. So anyway, I hope that kind of gets to the question there and kind of explains why I need to waffle so hard on it.
So I know that this is something that is, you know, a gray area, as I understand it, but I do also hear from a lot of agents who say, look, if I'm representing the seller and I'm doing a good job for the seller, why would I want to bring up something that is not necessarily a disclosable issue? But then the other side of it is, if so many people are hearing about this, I mean, we've got constantly, we're seeing comments in Nextdoor or even the media, you know, and they pick this up, particularly the water issue. You know, it was like a comment in a newspaper that the water, Pittsburgh had the worst water in the nation. I mean, that was the comment. And it doesn't matter at that point whether it's a disclosable issue or it isn't, it's there. That's the elephant in the room. And, you know, it just seems to me that somebody, a buyer or a buyer's agent, is going to bring this up. And, you know, it just feels wrong not to address it. And it's the same thing. Briar Chapel is just that the residents have been very verbal about the smell issue. And therefore it is the elephant in the room. That's my comment. I'm seeing some other questions. Somebody's asking, and I don't quite understand this question, so you can unmute yourself if you like, about clarifying wells. They want to get a clarification of wells and also the defined area for this material fact. And I'm not sure what your question actually is. So if you can unmute or raise your hand and we will unmute you. While that's going on, the article in Consumer Reports magazine rated Pittsburgh as the worst on PFAS. Okay, and that came from Roger. Thank you, Roger. Okay. Anybody want to pop in? I'm going to ask if Frank is within earshot here. I don't know if Frank Nowinski is on this call right now, but if you are, I'd love for you to make a comment or ask a question.
Yeah, thanks, Jessica.
Uh-huh.
As far as well water, about 2 years ago, there was a seminar at the Ag Center, and there was a bunch of professors and that they actually discovered the high levels in the Haw River coming down into Pittsburgh. And they did mention that wells are being contaminated. So if you do have a client that has a well, you really need to have that water tested or at least disclose it may be a potential issue. The PFOAs are making into water all over the country, so it's not just in the Haw River, it's everywhere. It's just that the Pittsburgh water was an extremely high level.
Yeah, I agree with that, Frank. On the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality website, they said they've tested 5,172 wells, 16 up to 16 miles from the Fayetteville plant. So that's the one they're talking about. And of those, roughly 5,200, 227 qualified for the granular system. So I think Jim's right. It's not necessarily as prevalent, but just looking at the stats, but it's at least some, and certainly enough where I think you'd want to look at least looking at it and making a disclosure about it, even if you have a well there.
Okay, Frank, did you have anything else you wanted to mention about that?
I would guess one more. I could probably say one thing. I would just suggest for that would just be contact Chatham County Environmental Health, which is overall wells and septic in the area, and just specifically ask the question, how many or what number of wells do you have in the county that have tested? Because they should be aware of that, especially if they're presenting a topic where they say that's going on. They should have a number that they can give you, and maybe that then helps you to decide, is this a disclosable thing on a well or not? I mean, if it's one, is that disclosable that you need to worry about it? If it's if it's 1,000, that's probably different, puts it in a different context. And I don't think it's 1,000. I would be very surprised because I'm not aware of any in our localized area that's had that. That doesn't mean it hasn't happened. I'm just not aware of it myself. So
we had a comment that, excuse me, Jeff Jackson, who's running for Senate, will be at Briar Chapel this afternoon at 5:30 holding a town hall meeting. And this is a great time to get his attention on this matter. And then I had a question, what is the most efficient route to get well water tested?
I could jump in on that one. If it's the homeowner, they certainly could just have environmental health do it. I'm not sure efficiency works in anything nowadays because everything's taking 10 times as long to get anything done. So that would be one way, or just hire a private company to do it. And there are some really good resources for some out-of-state labs that will ship in a kit for you that I think are great. Some of them I couldn't attest to, but there's a few resources and it's very reasonable. You can have 100 parameters tested for $300, and so it's a real easy thing for a homeowner to do themselves. And they can fill up the bottles themselves, ship it overnight with a little freezer pack in it. And I think their company is called National Testing Labs, and they do an awesome job for a reasonable amount of money. And they do it. They have a program for city water, and they have a program for well water. I am not sure if they specifically are doing PFOS in their testing for the city water. I haven't done it in a while with them, but they're really good. National Testing Labs is the name of the company. So.
Great, thank you for that information. Some information just came in that Jeff Jackson will be speaking at the park at Briar Chapel, and that's at 1051 Andrews Store Road, And that is again tonight at 5:30. Roger is saying the Fayetteville numbers for wells are affected by the chemical plant producing the materials being there. Okay, thank you for that. Somebody was asking about the smell issue again in Briar Chapel. So this person that's asking said that they didn't know about this and just sold a house there and it was not disclosed, and has asked me to please share what I know and what I meant. I would like to defer to Frank. Would you like to jump in on that one? Or Michelle, anybody from Government Affairs Committee?
Yeah, I can jump in.
Okay.
So the odor issue in Briar Chapel, it's from the wastewater treatment plant that's on site there. It's really affects the homes that are fairly close to that treatment plant. So, I mean, depending on where the home was within the community, it may not really be an issue. So that might be part of why it wasn't disclosed, but there also should have been a disclosure stating that they do have the wastewater treatment plant within the community.
Okay, thank you, Frank. Okay, do we have any other questions outstanding here? Let's have a look. Okay, yep, there are some. Does the typical refrigerator filter remove PFAs from the water? Oh, I think we've answered that. Hold on, let me move down here. Pardon me for taking a little bit of time here. Let's see. More about Jeff Jackson. Okay, it looks like nobody's bringing up any new questions. If you do have a question, feel free to jump in, unmute yourself, or we can unmute you if you raise your hand. Okay. Nobody else? Anybody want to make a parting comment from our panel? Well, then I am going to thank you two. You have really helped us, and I think that it does clarify the issue for our members. As you can see, people, this is important and we should give a lot of consideration to it. I want to say thank you to both of you for teaching us about this today and for joining us today. I want to also mention that our Education Committee and our Government Affairs Committee has really been working very hard on finding the kinds of things that are going to keep us out of trouble, as well as being more professional. And this is so good because, to me, we do sell in such a very large area, and there's so many issues that are maybe in smaller areas, and we don't focus on that, and yet it's part of our selling area. I see that we do have another couple of questions that just popped up, so let me look at those. Okay, that was just a thank you for the clarification. And what is my comment to FEMA and Freddie Mac about the community system? Oh, okay, wait, hold on. I'm gonna go back one. Okay, so one person asked if PFAs are in the well, what do we do? And I believe it's the same thing. You know, it's the, disclosing and then a filtration system.
Yeah, I don't know on treatment wise, you would do anything any different than kind of what we talked about a little bit.
Right. Okay, so the appraiser, Reg Morgan, asked, can you discuss the issues? Oh, no, he already asked that. What is my comment to FEMA and Freddie Mac about the community system? And that was about the waste treatment and the smell, I guess. Reggie, can you unmute yourself and ask your question directly? Are we able to do that? Okay. I I guess that question then would go to John as far as if he's an appraiser and he knows that there's a problem. Oh, he can't talk, he says. Okay. He just wants to know, going back to Freddie Mac. I'm sorry, this screen is popping up all over the place. How does he disclose that as an appraiser? John?
I have no idea.
I think,
Here's my thing, I guess, and I apologize. I just don't have knowledge about this, but I just don't know what a duty an appraiser has to disclose those things to a lender. Yeah, I would have to look that up, and I just don't know.
okay. So that's a question for another day. And Reggie, if you find anything out, let us know. Okay, so I am going to go back to one other thing that I wanted to let everybody know about. If you have missed the great announcement that was made yesterday, OCHAR has a new website, and we just went active yesterday on it, and it is fabulous. If you haven't had a chance to look at it and log in for the first time and get your information and your picture and all of that set up, please take a moment and do that. Look at your emails from OCHAR. We're working hard to make things better for you, and I hope you're appreciating that. Our committees are just the best, and our committee chairs are great. Offer your help and support as well, because they are so wonderful in offering all of this time on your behalf, and I really hope that more of you get involved. If you enjoyed the program today, consider joining the Government Affairs Committee or the Education Committee. I want to thank all of you for attending, and I look forward to seeing you in July for some of our awesome sessions. We will do a kickoff in July with 2 programs on forms changes that will be taking effect beginning July 1st. So stay tuned, and please register for those for a class on the forms, and we'll have a great discussion then too. For now, I want to thank you for coming, and have a great day, everybody.